Hey, it's Brain Muffin, and welcome back to Nerd Corner. And here we take a trip down memory lane with Christer Enforce. I guess that's how you say his name. This is from hackernoon.com, a love letter to the Commodore 64. Now, what's interesting is back in the day, I didn't know hardly anybody that had a Commodore. In fact, I don't know if I knew anybody in high school when I had, everybody had Apple IIs and a handful of people had Ataris. But 64s was years later I learned how important the machinist was. So, Dad, if you don't stop talking about things from the 1900s, people are going to think you are from the 1900s. Well, we are. It's been 9 years since my daughter said the above to me at 6 years old, and I've nearly forgiven her by now. I still love her, but this story is about her. No, this story is about my first love, the Commodore 64, a home computer from the 80s, which is still the best-selling computer of all time. Mainly because Apple came out with several varieties of the Apple IIe. Now, the Apple IIe is the longest-selling computer of all time. Commodore tried multiple times to replace the Commodore 64, and the 128C was probably the best attempt. It was still best-selling computer. Okay, more PCs have been sold since, of course, but no single model. Again, no single model. That's important. Of any Commodore sold, any computer sold more units, as many units. It's in the millions. It's ridiculous how many they sold. And so why did this crappy old computer, you may ask? Well, why do I love this crappy old computer? Well, of course, back in the day, it wasn't crappy. They watched what Apple did, and basically Apple, the Apple II was a 1976 design, and then the Atari came out in the late 70s, early 80s, and then 82, I want to say, is when the Commodore came out. The SID chip, the SID, characteristic SID music. The answer is simple: nostalgia. Let me tell you the story how I came to treasure this piece of 1980s technology. And so here we have a facsimile of the boot screen. Yep. So 64K of RAM, and of which only 38,911 bytes are free. So that's, 36K, something like that. Basically, pun intended. So it's basic bytes free. So basic is loaded. Basic language is loaded. And Commodore paid Microsoft to do that, but then on the VIC-20, I think, or the PET, and they never really updated it. So by the time you get to 64, the basic is horrible. When I was 9 years old, my brother was gifted an old Commodore VIC-20, which was the precursor to the Commodore 64. Yep, 3.5K, I think. Back in those days, computers didn't have hard drives, and usually not even floppy drives. They came with tape decks. You're right. Load and press enter and play. And Atari and Commodore both did the tape decks correctly. Apple, horrible what they did. They didn't, basically these things were integrated into systems by then, and Apple could have come out with a card or something, but they never did. The book, when my brother received that computer, he also received the book. Oh, that book was a special indeed. It was red and torn with age and contained within its tattered pages something which to me was magical. The basic source code of games that we could type in. The book was called something, Spellivic, Playvic in English. Oh, he's not from, does it say where he's from? I don't know. An amateur martial arts nerd. Oh, parent gamer, professional software developer nerd, and he's got some similar interests that I do. The previous owner of the book had typed up a few of these games and saved them on tape that thankfully came with the computer. It was so exciting to slowly load these games one after the other to see what would happen when we started in the book. Was what ignited my passion for programming, which remains to this day. Without it, I would not have the software development, not have been a software developer. Who knows? Might not have been. Spieler? See, German would be Spiele. I wonder if he's Dutch. Okay. The Commodore 64 and its games. Anyway, that old VIC-20 sadly broke not too long after. A few years later, during the summer of 1988, I spent a lot of time flipping through the book. I longingly read through the game descriptions over and over, trying to understand the basic listings. 88, that is really late for those machines. By this time, my brother had also acquired a number of computer magazines, mostly Swedish, Svenska Hemdatorhacking. Svenska Hemdatorhacking. It would be my guess. These two I perused, especially the views of games for the more powerful Commodore 64. Then in the fall, the same year, my father bought me my very own 64. So by 88, those things were pretty inexpensive. Oh, what a joyful, and maybe not in Europe. I was finally able to play computer games again. Two of my earliest favorites were Zorro and Bruce Lee, both of which came on a compilation tape called Master Games Platform Perfection with the computer itself. So there you had to load the whole game from tape. That must have taken a long time. So here we have a view. I know no one can hear the sound if it plays. I don't even know if it would play. I should have made this window bigger, but hey, the sound is great. Oh, the SID chip still, even though I didn't really have the thing back in the day. Oh, and those noises, the Ataris made those. Even your Commodore, not Commodore, ColecoVision. I had one of those that had made those very similar sounds. That is great. Okay. Computer games were obviously a lot different than from what they are now, and it's clearly evident by video. A modern computer in 2018 will typically have something like 8 gigs of RAM. Yeah, that's a lot. With 8 billion bytes, while the Commodore said 64,000. This means that the modern computer has 131,072 times of memory. Man, yeah, and they're cheaper. Nowadays, the Commodore, I think was, if I want to remember correctly, was like $400, $500, 30 some odd years ago. So maybe like $1,000 nowadays or more. That's a difference of significant. That was an 8-bit internal machine that had an offshoot of the 6502, and it was 8-bit, had 16-bit memory register. That's why you can do 64K. But even by the late 80s, some of these machines had a meg. You could get an Apple II with a meg, and I think Commodore, they came out with something that had that, and it would just memory swap, which was incredible considering you could only do 64K at a time. The memory swapping and bank switching and all the weird stuff they did. That's a difference of some significance. It is. Memory was seriously scarce in those days, which meant that the game creators had to spend a lot of time optimizing their software to make it as small as possible. And I wish I wish they would still do that. You don't just need to barf all over my hard drive and take up 2 gigs of RAM. And also that is main memory. It's not odd to have a video card with 2 gigs of RAM on it too. So that's where all of the shaders go and all that stuff get loaded into memory there. So they don't even take up the main memory. For example, would you believe if I told you that the music by Rob Hubbard for Money on the Run was only 4 kilobytes, so 4K. That's considered shorter than the amount of text in this article, even if we pretend that Unicode isn't a thing and that our character is still 1 byte. So 4,000 characters. Think of 4,000. Actually, that's 1,024. So that's, what is that? 4,196,000. Yeah, 4,196 characters. Think of that, just single space character. That's not much at all. And still, the song is over 6 minutes long and well worth listens. It probably loops a lot. I'm not going to listen because you guys can't hear it anyway. And I somehow, some way, if somebody knows how I can capture these things on my Mac, I do. Somewhere I have SoundFlower, and supposedly you're supposed to be able to do this, and I've never been able to get it to work. And as if the amount of RAM and 3-channel SID sound isn't limited enough, the CPU, the MOS, it wasn't actually a 6510, yeah. Clocked at 1 megahertz, yep. And then I think the Commodore, the 128 or the 128, so there was a version of the 128 that had that in the Z80, but I don't think you could use them at the same time. Believe me when I tell you that makes games such a craft. Yep, got to do stuff. Modern computer has 16 million, actually more than that. That's the 8-bit color. It's actually 32 because you actually have a 4th channel. I forget, it's a gamma correction. I always forget what that 4th channel is. But more and more you're getting 10-bit and 12-bit color bits per channel, so you get more than that even. A lot of 4K screens do more colors than that. The Commodore 64 on the other hand had 16 colors in total, so that was a difference factor of 1 million. But all these limitations did bring some advantages that modern games do not have. They left a lot to the imagination. Yeah, you just kind of hinted at stuff, and you had to use very interesting dithering techniques. When I go through Force on a modern game, my imagination is completely disengaged because it's not needed. Every possible detail is right there. Yeah, even down to the vines on the leaves. It's amazing. But when I entered the mysterious forest of the Cursed Kingdom of Turo in Fireland on my beloved 64, that is a completely different story. The other was almost symbolic. Yep. Books have an advantage over movies in that they create images. And yeah. So here we have, look at that. So it's just hints of stuff, but that is very cleverly done and there was weird ways on the Commodore where you could do mixed modes and stuff like that. Like I said, they really learned from what Atari and Apple had done before and really showed what the 8-bit realm really could do. And Apple did have on the GS. Well, they did on the 2E as well, but especially the GS and the 2E, they had the double high res graphics, and they could do more. The bat was bank switching and some other things, and it was really incredible. But it was most of that was for stills. You couldn't do a game that way because the CPU was busy flipping stuff back and forth between scans of the screen so that things would show up. Don't get me wrong, limited as the platform was, that some people managed to squeeze out in the Commodore 64 was nothing short of amazing. That's true. Look at the background of the International Karate Plus by Archer McCain. The choice of color is lovely as all the animations of water. Yeah, that's so animations. Wow, that is incredible. I'm going to play this, at least in part. Let's skip ahead. So you can't hear him, thank goodness, but look at that. Look at that. While you're playing, that is animating. That's awesome. Though the background is the game is indeed amazing. At the time, the best feature of International Karate Games graphics were the well-drawn, smoothly animated fighters. Fist 2, another well-known. Yeah, and there was a karate game for the Apple, the name of which escapes me at the moment, that had unbelievably smooth. That was only, so the Apple high-res was only 4 colors. That's amazing. Okay, so that was, wow. And the sound is very good too. And that's a lot faster than what you would get on an Apple. So you've got shading. Let's get rid of this. But you've got shading on the guy's chest even. And even when his hand isn't there. So looking at several shades of brown. Oh, that is incredible. That is just truly incredible. Excellent work, guys. Also notice when it come to fighting games in those days, the right move was the one with the correct range. If you were too close to your attack would go straight through. Yep. Collision detection was very late. The cooperative games or mini games which supported 2 simultaneous players using 2 joysticks. And while it was hilarious to thwart Bruce Lee's progress as the Green Yamu, the game enjoyed the most were the ones I could play cooperatively with a friend. Probably the most popular of these was Bubble Bobble. I never heard of, but again, I wasn't the Commodore 64. I didn't know about the Commodore 64. Let's see if we can skip ahead to the gameplay. So there you go. Look at that. That's pretty wild. That is awesome. I'm going to have to get a Commodore emulator or something. Another one I really liked was Whizball. So, okay, so I don't have time to go through this whole thing in gory detail. We're going to end up with 20-minute me talking. That's just insane. The graphics of Commodore 64 backgrounds, one aspect was that it was based on blocks of 8 by 8 pixels. Those blocks were actual characters. Yep, and you could redefine them. And you could have, and this was where you could squeeze more resolution or perceived resolution out of the thing than you could. And then, 320 by 200 was insane back in the day. And the Apple had a pretty good high res too, and Atari wasn't bad. And again, you got to have memory space for all that. It's not each pixel's not 1 bit, because then it would just be 2 colors off or on, black or white. So if you had 4 colors or 16 colors, you would have various combinations for each memory space. Each pixel would have more values, and how they, because some of these, Apple wasn't this good, I don't think. Then several of these resolution modes, you'd only have 4 colors or whatever. And if you try to do, if you did the math on how much you would need for one screen at some of these resolutions with say 16 colors or 32 colors, you would fill more than 64K, which was the size of the screen of the whole machine. To make background graphics, the graphic designers would redefine characters to look much like tiles rather than letters and numbers. Yeah, and then put them together and scroll. Once the off reached -1 or 8, you'd reset at 0, and then basically you'd move blocks around. It was amazing what they would get things to do in between cycles and move in memory. The demo scene for Atari machines and Commodore is there's some of that for Apple, but you're so limited with music there, it's not as good. But man, I've seen some amazing stuff. And then they, of course, the Amiga and others, they did that too. Tricks could be employed to display more than that. Because in between scans, you could change stuff. And another interesting aspect of Commodore 64 graphics were the fact that each background character had 2 colors. For example, a well-known Commodore 64 starting screen, all characters have a background color of blue, while the foreground is light blue. Wait, does that mean that only 2 colors can be used in every 8 by 8? Yes, in high resolution mode, but the Commodore 64 has a low resolution mode, allowed 4 colors per cell. And the drawback of this mode was that each pixel is twice as wide as a normal pixel, which technically meant that each pixel consists of 2 pixels and therefore 2 bits. Take a look at the beautiful high-res image below. If you look closely enough, you'll see that each 8 by 8 pixel consists of only 2 colors. Incidentally, the previous version, Firelord game also used high-res graphics. Most graphics use low resolution. So there's what you could do with all that trickery, fake out the eye and let the brain fill in. I mean, that is just incredible. I mean, you're talking a machine 35 years ago. The music, it's just one thing about the Commodore Ignites more nostalgia is the Sid wood chip was legendary. It really was. And could play 3 sounds, and it had 3 channels for output. And I want to say in the 128 they changed that. They made it better. Some music is obviously amazing, consistent. Yeah, the constraints of it's just incredible what people came up with, and unfortunately you can't hear it. Many techniques were used to work around the limitations of the system. For example, to play a 3-note chord would require all 3 channels, leaving no channels free for other instruments to get along. The songs would use an arpeggio, rapid switching of notes on one channel, which gave the illusion of a chord being played. Cannot conclude the section of music without mentioning my absolute favorite Commodore 64 song, Central Park, by Matt Gray from The Last Ninja. Yeah, wow. I mean, that is incredible graphics and sound considering BASIC, my introduction to programming. And let's get this wrapped up. So BASIC didn't have the BASIC. Making very, very bad games with Commodore 64 taught me. The BASIC for it was horrible. And they finally got around, and after Jack was gone, and I think there was a cartridge BASIC. And the problem with BASIC is the language started to grow, and it very, very rapidly could outgrow this whole 64K. By the late 80s, the BASIC, like you would say have on an IBM, would be like 100K or more. And you're dealing with a machine that might at most have a meg of RAM, but at least you'd have 512K, 256K, and but you couldn't do that on a Commodore. Of course, they had moved on to the Amiga by then, and Atari had moved on to the ST. But so why am I writing this article? Well, I'm not quite sure, to be honest. This is a great article, but I know that I love that old computer. It still fascinates me to this day. It comes from a time where programmers had to really watch. Yeah, and I actually had a VIC-20 BASIC program that ran out of memory before a friend and I were working on it, and got very close to being done, and we ran out of memory. We actually had to remove stuff in order to save it. I don't remember it was doing something. I don't remember what it was doing, but just in case it taught me, is actually possible to learn how to program. Because remember, when you're doing the stuff in BASIC, that interpreter is in memory with your program, as opposed to when you do machine language or something, and then you don't load BASIC, and you don't have all the 64K because you still have the minuscule of an OS in there. You have a very small amount of RAM, but you can probably get 50K or maybe even more. You can switch out stuff. And memory and screens were directly tied to memory addresses. Let's look at some comments. Yeah, thanks. This is a great article. This really is good. I love your post reminding us while playing Central Park by Matt Gray. It's before my time. Yeah, I think this is the single most important takeaway from this. Old school games required an investment from the player, an investment in imagination. Modern games take all this away, and the player is taken to a ride with no effort required. Yeah, and a lot of those games you could not save your progress. So if you turned it off, you started all over again. And that's as far as I can scroll down where I have my capture box. All right. So do you have memories of the Commodore 64? Are they fond? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Do you glad those days are over? Or do you really, I know there's lots of videos of people with Commodore 64s and Ataris and old Apples all running. And I'm not talking emulation, running the hardware. I've seen them. The 8-bit guy has taken the Commodore apart and got it to work again. He's taken the 128 apart and got it to work again. It's absolutely great and fascinating. I love to see it. So, all right. Thanks for stopping by. Thanks for clicking like, and thanks for sharing. Goodbye.